But the biggest problem, which has always been there from the day that the law was passed, has been to stop people from trying to change the law so it affects their product in a different way, because it would ruin the whole thing. The law is so effective because it was an economic problem, and we found an economic solution to solve the problem. And that is that they wanted a fair chance to make a profit, like any business would expect. And so the law was set up as incentives to entice companies into developing these drugs. But every few years, somebody comes along, some company comes along and says, well, I think we should change the law this way or change the law that way. And if you start to tinker with it, you will lose the soul of the law. Don't try to change it in these minor ways, because you don't want to destroy the main essence of the law, which is to provide a fair chance to make a profit. And some companies have made a huge profit from it, but that's the whole point. If they didn't have that inducement, they wouldn't have gone into orphan drugs in the first place. What happened was, my son couldn't get this drug because the company was not going to develop it for Tourette syndrome. And a mother from California had called me because her son had terrible Tourette syndrome, and he was able to get this drug from Canada. But he had a friend going to Canada, and they asked the friend to bring back the drug. Customs Department confiscated it at the airport. And since he couldn't get the drug, the mother called me and said, what should I do? And I said, call your congressman. By the way, who is your congressman? And she said, Henry Waxman. And Henry Waxman is one of the most powerful people in Congress on issues that have to do with health. And so she called her congressman. He said, I think this subject is important enough to hold a hearing. And he asked me, and he asked this young man from California, and he asked Dr. Van Wert, who was dealing with myoclonus, and a young woman who had myoclonus, to come down there and testify. This was June of 1980. And we testified. I expected to walk into the room and there would be a lot of people from the drug industry sitting in the room. It was a huge hearing room. There was nobody in the audience. The industry said, they're making this up. We're not going to waste our time and go down. He had invited them to testify, and they decided they weren't going to. But all the way in the back of the room was one person, a young man. And we testified and at the end of it, I said to one of Waxman's aides, what should we do now? What to expect? And he said, that's up to you. If you can get the public to demand a solution to this problem, we'll be able to do something. Well, I went home not realizing the following day in the Los Angeles Times, there was a small article printed about this young man who was sitting next to me and his problems of getting the drug. And I think the title of it was Youth Asks Lawmaker to Back Orphan Drugs. I think that was the title. And so that was in the Los Angeles Times. And then a couple of days later, I was working at the Tourette Syndrome Association at that time, and somebody said, Abbey, there's a man on the phone, and he says his name is Maurice Klugman, and he's the brother of Jack Klugman. And I said, yeah, this is really going to be fun. Well, it turned out he was Maurice Klugman, and he was a producer of The Quincy Show. And he said, I think that my brother should make a show about this topic because this is not just entertainment. He should be using that show to teach people about health problems that arise and health policy things that are important. And so, yes, he did a program about Tourette syndrome and orphan drugs. And at the end of the program, there was a notice that Even though the story was fictional, the orphan drug problem is real. And if you'd like to help, write to the show. Well, he got thousands and thousands and thousands of letters. He didn't even open them up. He just put them in big sacks, and he sent them all to me. So here I was sitting with thousands and thousands of letters from people, many of whom had rare diseases, and said, "Can you find help for me?" But other people said, "I don't have a rare disease, but I think it's terrible that people with rare diseases have no hope of ever getting treatment. And what can I do?" So every time I opened up a letter, I kept a list of their name and address. And I knew that what we had there was a mailing list of people who were willing to write to their congressman to get the problem solved. And so after another year, Mr. Waxman decided to hold another hearing. And by then, the pharmaceutical industry was totally embarrassed. So they decided they would testify. And Waxman asked Jack Klugman to come in and testify. And he did. And because he was going to be there, every congressman that was on the committee decided to be there. And cameras there from all the TV stations, et cetera. And so there was just overwhelming publicity for this. And then a little while later, his writer, one of Klugman's writers, would give me a call and say, "What's happening? Is anything happening?" And I said, "Really, things are not happening now. Things are totally at a standstill because there are some senators that are holding up the bill. And once a senator puts a hold on a bill, it's very hard to find out who he is. Mm-hmm. You know, what's the name of that senator and what is his problem?" But Klugman decided he would do another show about a senator holding up the orphan drug bill. And he said, "What I want to do in this one is have a march on Washington." And I said, "Well, I could probably get the patients for you, but they're not well enough to travel, and it's in the middle of the winter, and you know, to have them marching on Washington in the middle of winter, I think that a lot of people would get really sick if they had to do that." And he said, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. They don't have to go to Washington. There's a street in Pasadena that looks just like Washington." So that's what happened. He had his march on Washington just for that show. It was on a street in Pasadena, but the thousands of patients showed up in wheelchairs, and, you know, I mean, crutches. It was just, they were so proud to be part of this. They really were. It was a great opportunity for them. And so that second show actually got the law passed because people were willing to write to their congressman to make sure that there was no more stalling.